For as long as I remember, Fate series was something that I was very interested in getting into, in particular Fate Grand Order. Actually, Fate Grand Order was really the entrance point for me in Fate series, and for the longest time I thought that Fate Grand Order was just this original video game they released on mobile, from which it became so popular it spawned this other series that people talked about. While in reality, the irony was that Fate Grand Order was basically a culmination of entirety of the Fate franchise. It was other way around. I really wanted to go into Fate Grand Order because I liked the characters, I liked what they looked like, the way they fought, these noble phantasms and stuff, and the concept that you can summon so many historical figures from the past across the history. It was really novel idea that I just was really drawn into. I wanted to start Fate Grand Order, but I kept hearing about how it was not a wise idea to do it in the beginning, because apparently Fate Grand Order was this game that pretty much connected everything that has come before it, and to go there blindly, while you will have some fun, you will miss out on many things that it referenced. And while the idea of going there was very tempting, I also didn't want to just sit down and, have all those references and hints go over my head like an idiot. So I went and watched Fate Stay Night anime. I didn't really read visual novel because, like I said, I was not really interested in Stay Night. More so, I was interested in Grand Order. So I just watched that anime for the sake of understanding how the world works, since apparently it is pretty much the pillar from which everything stems for. And I watched the anime, the first and second season of the Unlimited Blade Works, and watched the movies, the Heavensfield movies, and that was enough to understand the core principles, the holy grails, the master-servant relationship, the master spells, how the servants worked. After that, I just jumped right into the Fate Grand Order, and I had very difficult realization that Fate Stay Night was not enough to understand completely entirety of the Fate Grand Order, because, like I said previously, Fate Grand Order is culmination of everything Fate has ever put out, and that means other titles in Fate series besides Stay Night, like Fate Extra, all that stuff. I sat there going through singularities after singularities, and I did realize that there were some references that was going over my head, and I did not like that feeling. But I also didn't want to sit down and read everything about the other Fate series, because I was not interested in those particular Fate franchises. I was interested in Grand Order, and the Grand Order, for the unfortunate reason, is basically Avengers of the Fate series, and Avengers movie is basically culmination of every previously made movies, if you get my Marvel reference idea of what I'm trying to say. It was also a time where I found out that there is also a separate entire timeline from the Fate timeline itself that goes on the opposite direction. It's called Tsukihime. So basically the idea was that there is a Fate timeline where humanity is strong and that allows summoning heroic spirits, and there is this Tsukihime timeline where humanity is not that strong, and in turn it is governed and controlled by supernatural entities from the shadows, such as vampires, panthers, beasts, and stuff like that. And yeah, that was interesting enough to me that I actually went and read the Tsukihime remake, and man, that was a good read. That was also a time when I realized that remake was still missing out a lot of content from original visual novel, which also had some sort of sequel on top of it over the years that remake didn't even touch. And with the way things are going, the Red Garden, which is the part 2 of Tsukihime remake, I don't think it's coming out anytime soon, so waiting for that to happen is like it's a wrong choice, let's just say that. At some point throughout months and years from the moment I watched the Stay Night anime, I grew so close to Fate series that I generally became interested in how it worked. Like, how exactly does modern mage association work? What are mage families? What kind of fucked up stuff they do behind doors that I keep hearing about? What is Slick designation? How does Counterforce work? How did it split up into Human Order Counterforce and a Gaia Counterforce, which is like defense system of planet itself? And how exactly those two counterforces are at odds with each other? How exactly planets work in this series? What is the texture of the planet? What is the reverse side of the planet? What is the archetype? What is the type? I wanted to know more about Crimson Moon, which is the type of the moon. How did it came in contact with Earth Counterforce? Why did Earth allow Crimson Moon to spawn vampires on it? So many things, so many missing information that I just wanted to find out. And so I decided to, sit down and actually read everything that NasuVerse has ever put out, and I mean everything. I also went out and actually created a map of basically entire franchise of the NasuVerse, be it Tsukihime, be it Fate, and everything between. Okay, so welcome to basically what is a game plan. It looks a bit scary, I know, but let me explain in shortly what this is actually. So when I said that I wanted to basically understand the entirety of the NasuVerse, that meant understanding entirety of the lore. And as we know, Fate is pretty much known for having a lot of sequels, prequels, and everything in between that gets kind of a bit messy. So I tried my utmost best to pretty much put everything in order to see what to watch, what to read after what. And before we start, please ignore the Grand Order part. This is basically about Fate Grand Order timeline and what to read. It is not finished because Fate Grand Order in a breakdown on its own is already big as it is, so I'm not touching it yet because before I go to the Fate Grand Order, I want to basically consume everything that comes before it. So as you can see, there is some sort of divergences and separate parts, and let me explain what is what basically. This area right here, entire area right here, is basically a Fate timeline that explains what is what. Down below is basically a Tsukihime timeline that, like I already mentioned, is a timeline where basically supernatural entities control the humanity and humanity cannot summon heroic spirits. And there is a start point that I chose, and then there are some topics and novels as well as some extra stuff that are either a different timeline on its own, completely different from what we know, or some sort of storyline that can be set in between both Tsukihime or Fate timeline, so basically belonging to both. So without further ado, let me give you guys a start ahead on how I'm going to start my plan of consuming NasuVerse content basically. So starting point, I think the best way to start starting point is to read Witch on the Holy visual novel, which is available on Steam. I already got it, so yeah, I'm going to maybe stream it. I don't know, sit down and read the visual novel, and I think that should give us basic understanding of how Magecraft and basically Mage Society works. The funny thing about this Mahoyo is that it can belong both to Fate timeline as well as Tsukihime. And after I'm done with that, I guess I can go with Adventure of the First Love, which is kinda like a side story to Mahoyo. So yeah, it's like a compliment. After that, I'm going to move on, and I'm not really going to read visual novel of this, but more so just watch the anime of the Garden of Sinners, which should give us basic idea about Counterforce, some cool things about Mystic Eyes, and as we know, it is separated in, well, a lot of parts. So yeah, different movies that in total makes up the Garden of Sinners, and like Mahoyo, it also belongs to both Tsukihime and Fate timeline. Now after this is up to basically a choice really. We got Fate timeline, start of the Fate timeline, and start of the Tsukihime timeline. I think I'm going to start with Tsukihime timeline because works in the Tsukihime verse are not many compared to the Fate timeline, as you can see. So yeah, we're going to start with original Tsukihime novel, which I'm kind of excited because the one that I read was basically remake, which I'm going to still read after reading the original Tsukihime timeline. So basically the timeline order of my reading will be Tsukihime, the original, and then the Talk, which is a side story that takes place after original Tsukihime. Then I'm going to go to Kagetsu Tonya, which is kind of like a sequel to original novel, and then Melting Blood, which is like spin-off series, which still continues off where the story ends for the characters in the Tsukihime timeline, and then basically Prelude, which should, well, bring the original Tsukihime timeline to its end. And after that, I'm going to go and watch Tsukihime remake, play Tsukihime Type Lumina, which is like Melting Blood, has its additional storylines over there, Type Lumin Pieces in Paradise, which is I think is a manga, and then that should be it for the Tsukihime. I could also go on and read Clock Tower, which is a spin-off that takes place in Tsukihime timeline, but it also has connections to Fate Grand Order, so it is a good, well, a prequel stuff that you can read that connects Tsukihime timeline to Grand Order. I think I'm going to read this thing when I'm ready to start Grand Order, just because the stuff that's happening there, from what I heard, is pretty much connected with what's going to happen in Grand Order. And then we are going to start with Fate Stay Night visual novel, the basically a pillar of entirety of Fate franchise. This is where it all began, and this is where it all is going to build upon. So first we're going to read Fate Stay Night visual novel, and of course complete all of the roads, Fate Road, Unlimited Bladeworks Road, and of course Heavensfield Road. Then we are going to, I'm going to read Garden of Avalon, which is, well, I think it's a more detailed look on Artoria's character and what she has been through before going to Fate Stay Night timeline. And after that, we are going to move on to Fate Zero. This thing is prequel to Fate Stay Night, but it's kind of like an alternative timeline, at least the animes, because the stuff that happens in Stay Night and Zero are a bit different. For example, Artoria's character is very different in Zero, so yeah, different timeline, but still a prequel. Then I'm going to read the novel, and then we're going to move on with the Heart of the Freaks, Aesben Constellation Room, and then after that the Zero timeline will be done and we can just move on with Lord and Meloy 2 case files, combining novel and anime, and of course then continuing on with the adventures of Lord L. Meloy. I hope I pronounced that name right. And with that, I think we are going to go on with Fate Stay Night Hollow Atyrexia, which is basically a sequel to Stay Night. And then we're going to go to the Unlimited Codes, which is again a spin-off game, fighting game again about Stay Night. Then we're going to move on to basically today's menu for MBA family. I'm not sure how lore heavy this one is. It is more like a gag series, but it is still like set in a Stay Night timeline, so I'm going to pay attention to it. And then I think this is where we can really choose what other Fate franchise we're going to, touch upon, like Fate Extra, which has its own ladder of reading, or Strange Fake, which basically takes place after the Stay Night, or Fate Apocrypta, which is basically alternative timeline that is still connected to Stay Night but has its own diverging plot lines. And of course, a very hidden, not that popular, but still very interesting novel such as Fate Requiem, Fate Prototype, and its additional content such as Fragments of the Sky Silver, Fate Labyrinth, and so on and so forth. And of course, the other alternative timelines such as Fate Samurai Remnant, Type Redline, Tsukino Sango, which is very interesting because this one takes place in future, and from what I read in the summary, yeah, it's very interesting. And of course, Type Moon Ace Volume 1 to 10. I do not remember correctly what's going on here, but if I put it here, it means that there's supposed to be some sort of lore. And then, of course, Carnival Pantheons, which combines Tsukihime timeline and Fate timeline in a comedic series, not that interesting in terms of lore, but interesting in terms of character interactions. And of course, Angel Notes, which might be outdated, but still one of the best looks on things such as how planets work, the archetypes of the planets, and all that good jazz. And after we are done with all of this, which I think it's going to take a lot while, we're going to move on to Fate Grand Order, which, like I already mentioned, combines everything that we talked about before. And yeah, basically that's a breakdown. I'm going to, stream Witch on the Holy Night these days. Definitely looking forward to watching that. So make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out on my first impression of the Mahoyo. And yeah, that's it for now. This is how I'm going to start my deep dive and deep study of the NasuVerse, and I hope you guys are going to be there with me on every step of the way, learning more about this amazing world that Nasu has created. So yeah, without further ado, thank you guys for watching. Look forward for the streams where I'm going to stream the Mahoyo and other videos related to Fate. And yeah, I'll see you guys later. Peace.